Okay, howdy doody, everybody. Welcome back. Today, another day, going through Gurdjieff's magnum opus, all and everything, Beelzebub's Tales. Once again, if you want to follow along in the little live stream, go to the site gurdjieff.org, which is this site here. Scroll down to the bottom, go to their library, go to primary texts, and you can download the PDF that I'm using here. We are on chapter 29, The Fruits of Former Civilizations and the Blossoms of the Contemporary. Looks like it's going to be an interesting chapter today. Going to learn a little bit about history. Looks like everyone's there in the chat. Let me just turn down some settings. And once again, if you want to support the channel, you can subscribe to the Coffee account, give a one-time donation via PayPal. Like and subscribe, buy some merch. So, let's just jump right into it. Fruits of former civilizations and the blossoms of the contemporary. This is, also, remember, get your drinks ready and take a shot whenever I mispronounce something. So, last week we had a really good chapter on Hasnamusens. So we learned about good old Lenti going to the not planet Purgatory. He got sent to like some eternal Hasnamusen prison somewhere in the cosmos. So now we've kind of learnt that the entirety of humanity has degenerated because of the consequences of the Kundabuffer organ. And now they're just kind of going through history, slowly getting worse. Like, before, there was mainly humans kind of struggling to just get by, and then Hasnamusens would pop up every now and then. But it seems like a majority of humanity is slowly becoming more and more Hasnamusen-like as time goes by. And these consequences are crystallizing instead of, dissolving. So we'll see how this continues to produce in these further chapters. So, according to the associative flow of my tales concerning the three-brained beings breeding on the planet Earth, who have taken your fancy, I must now, my boy, without fail, explain to you a little more about those two powerful communities there named Greeks and Romans, who made a clean sweep from the surface of that ill-fated planet of even the memory of the results obtained from the most saintly labors of the essence-loving Ashyatashayamash. So that's interesting. They made a clean sweep. Does that mean they destroyed whatever remnants they were, or does that mean, like, after all of the remnants were destroyed, they then started kind of again from the ground upwards? And good old Ashyatashayamash, who, once again, as we've been reading, he kind of seems to be a composite creation, something between a Hermes Trismegistus and a Zarathustra. Nonetheless, I must tell you, first of all, that at that period, when on the surface of your planet, on the continent of Asia, there was actualized from above, within the presence of a three-brained being, the already definitized sacred conception of our now omnicosmic, very saintly Ashyatashayamash, and later also, during the periods of his very saintly activities and the subsequent gradual destruction by your favorites of all the results obtained from them, there also existed on the neighboring continent, then already called Europe, great numbers of those strange three-brained beings who have taken your fancy and who have already long before grouped themselves into various independent communities. So this is interesting, because before all of the history we were learning about, pre-Atlantis or post-Atlantis, prehistory, post-Atlantis, it was all in the continent of Asia. We were learning a little bit about Babylon, we were learning a little bit about ancient China, prehistory India, and then coming more into historical times, Babylon and Tibet and all of that. So now we're shifting across, we're shifting the map across, and we're going into Europe, and we're learning a little bit about what's happening in Europe from Beelzebub's perspective. So, Among the number of those independent communities, there were, during those periods, owing to the cosmic laws which I have once mentioned to you, those two large, and as they say, their most powerful communities, that is to say, well organized and possessing more means for the processes of reciprocal destruction, the Greeks and Romans. They love a little bit of reciprocal destruction, don't they? And about these, from the point of view of your contemporary favorites, very ancient communities, so very ancient. So we see them as ancients, but they're not. They're actually already in a state of degeneration by the time they come to us. Very ancient communities, I must furthermore not fail to explain to you, and possibly in detail, because not only did they then, as I have already said, make a clean sweep from the face of that unfortunate planet of the last results beneficial for all three-brained beings of all subsequent epochs, and even of all traces of the memory of the very saintly labors of the essence-loving Ashyata Shayamash, but they were also the cause that real nonsense already proceeds in the reasons of the contemporary favorites of yours, and that there is completely atrophied in them that fundamental being impulse, which is the main lever of objective morality, and which is called organic shame. This is interesting, because so Greeks and Romans, when he says Greeks, we're thinking about Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and there's that, what did Alfred North Whitehead say? All of Western philosophy is just footnotes to Plato. So he's kind of knocking all of Western objective reason and philosophy by including the Greeks in that, saying it's all nonsense. But when he says Romans as well, what did the Romans do, or what came out of the Romans? When you think of Romans, you think of kind of ancient Romans, but really he means Romans includes their shift to Christianity and the Christianizing of Rome. And really, what's the continuation of Rome? The Senate died, and then the empire continued, and then the empire split off into pieces and died. But something of something of the Roman Empire still continues, and that is the church. So all of this is bundled up into that nonsense. And you can kind of see, organic shame, that's all kind of connected there. The nonsense already proceeds in the reasons of the contemporary favorites of yours, and there is completely atrophied in them that fundamental being impulse. So their fundamental being impulses have been atrophied, which is the main lever of objective morality. So there's a fundamental being impulse, which is like the steering rod, or something that connects us or helps us actually use the faculty of objective morality. And called organic shame. That's very interesting. But so we don't have organic shame. We have an artificial shame. Very interesting. And it's all because of the Greeks and the Romans. So a closer acquaintance with these big groupings of your favorites and with various forms of bliss prepared by them, which have passed to the beings of later epochs, will give you a good idea and enable you to understand exactly how separate independent communities are formed there, and also how a given community, having become powerful, quite independently of the beings themselves, takes advantage of the fact and sets about destroying everything already attained by their other less powerful communities, and forces upon them their own new inventions, in most cases sincerely imagining that they truly are just what the others need. Ah yes, time and time again how that has failed completely, and forcing our own ways of life onto other peoples and cultures has catastrophic effects. Oof. Maybe the British were just trying to help the Africans. Well, maybe the native peoples of America and Africa should have thrown a couple more spears and arrows at the British. Maybe that would have solved more problems. Anyway, I must warn you, my boy, that my story of the history of their arising and of everything later connected with those ancient communities called Greeks and Romans is not based on the results of my personal investigations. No, I shall only give you the information about them which I got from one of those beings of our tribe who wished to exist forever on that planet of yours. So, okay, so this is not a Beelzebub direct experience. This is just secondhand. This is like, I know a guy. This is, I'm going to tell you about the Greeks and Romans. Source, I know a guy. So, the circumstances were these. In descending to the planet Earth for the 6th and last time, I proposed to attain at any cost the final elucidation to myself of all the genuine causes why the psyche of those three-brained beings, which should be like the psyche of the rest of the three-brained beings of our great universe, had on that planet become so exceptionally strange. And having during my investigations repeatedly constated that a fundamental cause of the various abnormalities of the general psyche of the contemporary beings was what is called civilization, sown by those two large groups of beings called Greeks and Romans, I was obliged to inquire into certain details about them also. Okay. Fundamental cause of the various... I'm just reading that again. Abnormalities of the general psyche. What did he say about the general psyche? Was what is called... So is civilization unnatural, or the civilization, what we call civilization, not true civilization? Sown by those two large groups, Greeks and Romans. He's kind of like throwing a lot of stuff under the bus. You know, like nowadays right-wingers are like, you got to be trad, man. And they all like post like pictures of like Greek or Roman statues with Nietzsche quotes, and it's basically Gurdjieff would have hated that. He would have just been like, "No, you guys are losers." I was obliged. Anyway, but as I was fully occupied at that time with my researches concerning the activities of the very saintly Ashiata Shaimash, I commissioned the elucidation of the history of the arising of these two independent groupings of your favorites, in respect of what is called their subjective being. Their being. But it's being and with a higher case being. So this is real being. And then, so higher case being, like capital B being is real being, and this lowercase being is fake being. But it's not objective being, it's subjective being. This is interesting. What is this little kind of play? Because it's like, there's a being that has forgotten itself and is faking a being. But then there's a layer of subjectivity which makes also another fake being on top of that. So you have a subjective being. Anyway, let's see what he says. To that same being of our tribe, who, as I have already told you, still carries on an undertaker's business. So how to be safe in a world of wacky people? Just run a funerary parlor and no one touches you. They're all like, oh, that's the death guy. In fact, everyone wants to be friends with you because everyone needs a coffin made. In a large city on the continent Europe, down to the present time. That's so funny. From the investigations of this countryman of ours, it seems that long ago, before the period to which my tale about the majestic city of Babylon referred, namely at the time when the process of the existence of those strange beings was proceeding mainly on the continent Asia alone, and when their chief centre of culture was Tikliamish, there were on that said continent of Europe, which is now the chief place of existence of your favorites, as yet no definitely organized communities. This is interesting because, you know, when he talked, Tikliamish is that prehistory Babylon, and he gives all these names like Mariplesi or Tikliamish to, illustrate some of these prehistorical things. Then with Europe, he doesn't even try. It's just like, yeah, Europe, it's called Europe. He doesn't give us a fancy name. It's the Vexial capital of... No, he's just like Europe. And so he says there were also no definitely organized communities. So it was all dispersed, nature-loving, maybe farmers, maybe just horse people or something. That's interesting. So there was no definite crystallization or coagulation of culture at this time when Tikliamish was around. So prehistory Babylon, but post-Atlantis, but prehistory. So there then chiefly existed on that continent two-brained and one-brained beings called wild quadrupeds and reptiles. Are we talking about dinosaurs? But of your favorites, the biped beings, there were then on that continent only wild quadrupeds. Is he talking about horses? Horses and reptile. I thought he was talking about dinosaurs for a second there. No, you could just be wild quadrupeds, horses, and then also there were reptiles like snakes and lizards. Okay, but your favorite, the biped beings there were then on that continent only a number of small groups, almost as wild as the quadrupeds themselves. Neanderthals, all of them. Cro-Magnon. The occupation of these small groups of biped beings was merely the destruction of the quadruped and reptile beings, and occasionally also of each other. Just a little bit, just a little bit. And the number of your favorites on that continent, Europe, only increased when immigrants from Mare Plessy, wandering from one place to another, finally arrived and settled there. So Mare Plessy, is that prehistory? Is that China or is that India? What were they called again? God, that's interesting because, they talk about the Aryan invasions of India, and then there's an Aryan migration kind of into Europe as well. So maybe that's a kind of a reference to that. Towards the close of that period, occasionally, geez, towards the close of that period, there migrated from Tikliamish to that continent Europe. Towards the close of that period, there migrated from Tikliamish to the continent of Europe a number of beings of the first Asiatic group who followed two quite distinct occupations. Namely, some of them were engaged in various marine occupations, and others in what are called their cattle raising and sheep farming. That's really interesting because there's a whole bunch of people who talk about the cultures of Europe and how the inner of Europe is this kind of huge migration, in from Asia of kind of like horse or chariot people. And, you got the Goths invading. But on the coasts, there's this completely other form of people who are like naval people. And you have a kind of a remnant of that in the Frisians up till this very day. And like the symbol of the wheel is also the symbol of like, the wheel on the deck of like a ship. And there's something interesting there. He's really kind of touching on some obscure kind of histories here. Very interesting. Anyway, cattle. So there's cattle. So at the moment, we got those very interesting kind of naval people kind of mixing with the cattle raising people. So marine occupation. So maybe he's saying like fishermen. There's even, I want to say like in Irish legends, when they talk about the Book of Invasions, the four races of Ireland. There were the Fomorians, and the Fomorians got replaced by, who are they? The Firbolg, and then the Firbolg were replaced by the Tuatha De Danann. I swear I'm forgetting one. And then, finally the Sons of Mer come, and the Sons of Mer are supposed to be, fishermen from Spain or something. And that's really interesting that he does that. It's like he does this whole kind of novel, and then every now and then it's just, drops some real-world lore. And I don't even know if they kind of knew that back then. Anyway, the cattle-raising families populated chiefly southern shores of the continent. So, continent of Europe. So, cattle families, southern shores of the continent. So, what are you talking about? Greece, Italy? Because those parts were, at that time, very convenient for the maintenance and grazing of such quadruped beings. Okay, so cattle is the quadruped being. Oh, so maybe like bulls. I guess it would include horses as well, but anyway. And that group of terrestrial beings was then called Latinarchy. So Latins, but also with a little bit of Anunnaki. Latinarchy there. A word that signified shepherds. Oh, that's interesting. The Latin people are the shepherds. At first, these shepherds existed with their families and flocks scattered in different places, but later on their numbers gradually increased, partly from the immigration of beings from the continent Asia, having the same occupation as themselves, and partly because they were becoming more and more prolific, owing to the fact that the nature of the planet Earth was beginning to adapt herself to the deteriorating quality of the vibrations she demanded that had to be formed from their radiations, by substituting those vibrations, which are now obtained only from the process of their sacred rascuano, or as they say, from their death. Okay, so humans used to emit properly just via their own enlightened or natural nature energies that feed the earth, but now they only feed the earth through death. And thus, when, thanks to all of this, their numbers had considerably increased and external conditions demanded frequent relations between separate families, they formed their first commonplace. And this commonplace they called Rimk. Interesting. It was from that group of Asiatic shepherds that the later famous Romans originated. Okay. their name having been taken from the name of their first commonplace, Rimpk. Huh. Rim, and then Rimp became Rims and Roms, Romans. Those Asiatic beings who were engaged in marine occupations, namely in fishing and in gathering sponges and coral and seaweed, emigrated with their families for the convenience of their profession and settled either on the western shores of their own continent Arshak, on the southern shores of the continent Europe, or on the islands of the straits which still divide the continents Asia and Europe. Okay. The beings of those newly formed groups of three-brained terrestrial beings were then called Hellenarchy. Okay, Latinarchy and Hellenarchy, a word that meant fishermen. So Romans are supposed to be cattle herds and Greeks are supposed to be fishermen. The number of the beings of that group also gradually increased, owing to the same causes already mentioned respecting the group of shepherds. The name of the beings of the second group changed many times, and finally they came to be called Greeks. And so, my boy, the beings of these two groups were one of the chief causes that the reasons of the contemporary favorites of yours have become mechanical. So it's their fault. And that the data for engendering the impulse of being shame, or remorse, I would assume, have become completely atrophied in them. Very interesting. These two groups were one of the chief causes of the reasons of the contemporary favorites have become mechanical. So there's something, the Greeks and Romans, we gain our tradition from them, and there's something in that tradition that's good for us, but there's also something in that tradition that needs to be burnt away because it makes us too mechanical. The Greeks were the cause of why the reasons of the three-brained beings there began gradually to degenerate and ultimately became so degenerated that among contemporary beings it is already, as our dear Mullah Nasr ad-Din says, a real mill for nonsense. And the Romans were the cause why, as a result of successive changes, those factors are never crystallized in the presences of the contemporary three-brained beings there, which in other three-brained beings engender the impulse called instinctive shame. That is to say, the being impulse that maintains what are called morals and objective morality. So natural remorse no longer crystallizes in us because of the Romans, and the Greeks have degenerated our reason, making it merely mechanical. Interesting. Interesting takes. Let's see where he goes. Let's see where he goes with these hot takes. We got some Gurdjieff hot takes this chapter. Thus, it was those two communities arose there, which afterwards, as it often happens there, became very solid and powerful for a definite period. And the history of their further maleficent prepared inheritance for the beings of subsequent generations is as follows. According to the investigations of our mentioned countrymen, it seems that the earliest ancestors of the beings of the community, which was later called Greece, were often obliged, on account of the frequent storms at sea which hindered them in their marine occupations, to seek refuge during the rains and winds in sheltered places, where out of boredom they played various games which they invented for their distraction. Interesting. As it later became clear, these ancient fishermen amused themselves at first with such games as children now play there. But children, it must be remarked, who have not yet started contemporary schooling, because the children there who do go to school have so much homework to do, consisting chiefly of learning by rote the poetry, which various candidate Hasnamusas have composed there, that the poor children never have time to play games. Kids need to play games. Kids need to play games and not learn by rote. So schoolwork damages kids, and really they need to learn to play. Damn straight. Damn straight. Briefly, these poor bored fishermen played at first the ordinary children's games already established there long before. But afterwards, when one of them invented a new game called pouring from the empty into the void, ooh, that's interesting, they were all so pleased with it that thereafter they amused themselves with that alone. Pouring from the empty into the void, is that just talking nonsense literally? Like making banal platitudes? Is this a dig at the sophists? This game consisted in formulating some question, always about some fiddle-faddle, or other, that is to say, a question about some deliberate piece of absurdity, and the one to whom the question was addressed had to give as plausible an answer as possible. That's very funny. So is this like a Zeno's paradox thing or a boat of Theseus thing? It's just like they make all of these absurd like thought experiments and just like, yeah, how would you resolve this? Wow. That's very interesting, and it just is pointless and makes you mechanical, apparently. That's basically most of intelligentsia now. Like, this, what the Greeks did has continued on for eons, and it had just crystallized in Hegel, and now Hegel is the source of literally all bad politics nowadays. It's all because of Hegel. God damn it. True River King says, yes, it's the rhetoric. This is rhetoric that they invent. Basically, the creation of rhetoric is this. Thinking up absurdities and then thinking about how to make it plausible. Disgusting. Ugh. That's why Max Stern, Max Stirner did say something about this. He said, like, it's not the strongest who rule the world. The strongest can be beaten by someone who's more intelligent. But it's not also the intelligent who rules the world. It's the persuasive. Those who can convince people are the people who rule the world. You don't, forget about strength or int builds. It's charisma. If you can convince people, if you can turn someone into the convinced, if you can be a persuader, then you can rule the world. So rhetoric in that case is the ultimate science, or the ultimate tool, the ultimate weapon. Hello, my boy, says Ciro. Hello, Ciro. I'm glad you could make it. Well, it was just this same game that became the cause of all that happened later. I believe it. I believe it. It's because of rhetoric that Hegel exists. It's because of Aristotle that Hegel exists. Damn it, Aristotle. Let me just move my little microphone. Okay. It turned out that among those ancient bored fishermen, there were several so bright and ingenious that they became expert in inventing, according to the principle of that peculiar game, very long explanations. Oh my god. I'm just having PTSD of Platonic dialogues where it's just yeah, it's a dialogue, and then it's just Socrates waxing poetic, and then one guy will be like, yes, Socrates, and then it's just Socrates talking again. Which is basically this book. It's like Beelzebub talking, and then Hasian being like, yes. The Martial Esoterist says, I interpreted that as an attack against philosophical contemplation and intellectual activity, which does sadden me. Yeah, there are people like mystics and kind of esoteric teachers through history who doubt reason. Like Agrippa was one of them. Gurdjieff, I'm not sure, you know what I mean. He talked about how the three types of men are inferior to the fourth type of man, and the third man is just the intellectual. So it's not that, philosophical contemplation is bad, but it's it's completely overused. And reason is the ultimate tool. No, actually, you should doubt reason. Reason, if used properly, may prepare a garden bed that then may sprout fruit, but it's completely overused. Is that because, Ciro says, is that because of Aristotle that politicians are effective? Yeah, well, good old rhetoric, yeah, basically. Well, Aristotle, through causal chain, created Hegel, and then, through Hegel we get Marx, through Hegel we even, what's his face? Mussolini's main philosopher, Giovanni Gentile, is that the guy? He was also a Hegelian. Francis Fukuyama was a Hegelian, or at least was influenced by Hegel as well. Just everybody, all of liberalism, not all of liberalism, but a lot of what you wouldn't expect it, but almost every single political kind of thing that's failed, or all of the conclusions of our politics nowadays all trace back to Hegel, which then go back to Aristotle, which goes to his rhetoric. So let's continue on, though. Let's not get lost in the weeds here. And when one of them discovered how to make what was afterwards called parchment from the skin of the fish called shark, then some of these skillful fellows, just to swagger before their companions, even began inscribing these long explanations of theirs on these fish skins, employing those conventional signs which had been invented earlier for another game called Mousetrap. Mousetrap, interesting. You're trying to trap something. I wonder if he's dissing Plato here. Still a little later, when these bored fishermen had already given place to their descendants, both these inscribed fish skins and the craze of the said peculiar game passed on to the latter by inheritance, and these various new inventions, both their own and their ancestors, they called first by the very high-sounding name science. So he's dissing, I guess, science more than philosophy, but nonetheless. And from then on, as the craze for cooking up these sciences passed from generation to generation, the beings of that group whose ancestors had been simple, Asiatic fishermen became specialists in inventing all kinds of sciences such as these. So Gurdjieff was a generalist, and he was pro being a generalist. You know, a jack of all trades is better than a master of one. And if you think about it, you know, back in those days, when we say philosopher now carries a completely different meaning. Like, philosopher now just means a guy who wears a beret and smokes a cigarette while critiquing, like, an art painting. You know, like a line through a blank canvas and being like, yes, it's about the Stalinist purges of Russia. It's like, that's not a philosopher. A philosopher is someone who's a generalist, in a sense. It's someone who has a metaphysics, they have an epistemology, or an understanding of what knowledge is. It's someone who has an ethos or a set of ethics, or how they should live their life, and that's microcosmic. And then the macrocosmic, if you have an ethos, how you should act, then how do you act in society, or how should a society be? So a philosopher will not just have an ethics, but also a politic. And also you can throw things in like a theory of aesthetics. They also have a logic. And back in these times, there would also be a mystic as well, a bit of a mystic as well. You know, Pythagoras, Plotinus, a little bit of Iamblichus. They were all mystics as well as philosophers. So a philosopher had a little bit of everything. And of course, they understood mathematics, they understood physics. They were literally everything. As time goes by, a lot of these things get deracinated off, like religion and the academy became two different institutions. And then slowly over time, after René Descartes, basically, philosophy then began losing more and more and more. And then eventually, I think physics was the first one to come off, and chemistry, biology, all of these things. And then eventually, finally, with the death of philosophy in modern times is when psychology itself kind of peels off. And then what are you left with? The kind of vague understandings of metaphysics that are so abstract no one understands them. Vague kind of circular epistemologies. You know, basically, when people talk about philosophy now, they don't even talk about politics, the philosophy of politics. They just talk about political science, not political philosophy. Maybe philosophy of ethics is like the only humanities kind of left kind of thing. I was like, ugh. It's sad what happened to philosophy. Anyway, generalists are better because they are well-rounded specialists. Well, Marshall X says generalists are better because they are well-rounded. Specialists can only be skilled laborers. Generalists can be leaders. Yes. Yes, exactly. So to be a proper esotericist, you also need to be a generalist. So he's critiquing the Greeks as well for becoming specialists. These sciences, moreover, also passed from generation to generation, and a number of them have reached the contemporary beings of that planet almost unchanged. So that is a degeneration in and of themselves, something that just hasn't changed, it's atrophied. And hence it is that almost a half of what are called the egoplasticori, arising in the reason of the contemporary beings of that ill-fated planet, from which what is called a being world outlook is in general formed in beings are crystallized just from the truths, in inverted commas, invented there by those bored fishermen of their subsequent generations. So we take what the bored fishermen said as axioms, and then upon these axioms we build the outlook of our world, and hence almost half, and that's almost half of our thinking, is basically all contained within that prison. Concerning the ancient shepherds who later formed the great powerful community called Rome, their ancestors also were often forced on account of bad weather to put their flocks into sheltered places and to pass the time, whether somehow or other. Being together, they had various talks, but when everything had been talked out and they felt bored, then one of them suggested that as a relief they should take up the pastime, which they called for the first time cinque contra uno, 5 against 1. An occupation, that sounds a little, wait, what? An occupation which has been preserved down to the present time under the same name among their descendants who continue to arise and exist there. I'm not sure. I don't want to type 5 against 1 into Google. So I'm going to wait for an explanation. So long as the only beings of the male sex then engaged in that occupation, oh boy, everything went quietly and peacefully. But when a little later their passive halves, that is to say their women, also joined in, oh boy, who immediately appreciating it, soon became addicted to it, they then gradually attained in these occupations such finesses that if our all-universal arch-cunning Lucifer should rack his honorable brains, he could not even invent a tithe of the turns these erstwhile shepherds then invented and prepared for the beings of the 16 generations of that ill-fated planet. Oh boy. Oh boy, so not even Lucifer with all of his brains could think up all of the gross stuff that these guys did. River King says the M word, so that's possibly what they all got engaged in. What do they say? Where I'm from, when a bunch of dudes get together, they call it dirty biscuit. I'm not sure. And then it says the women joined in? What the hell is going on? And so, my boy, when both these independent groupings of terrestrial three-brained beings multiplied and began acquiring every variety of those effective means, namely the means of a reciprocal destruction whose acquisition is the usual during all periods of their existence, so destroy the other and take all their stuff, they then begin carrying out these processes with other independent communities there. For the most part, of course, with the less powerful communities and occasionally among themselves, for the most part, of course, with the less powerful communities and occasionally among themselves. So usually, you would never attack someone stronger. You'd always kill the less powerful one and then also occasionally kill your brother. Hence Cain and Abel. It is extremely interesting to notice that when periods of peace occurred between these two communities, their communities of almost equal strength in respect of the possession of efficient means for the processes of reciprocal destruction, the beings of both groups, whose places of existence were adjacent, often came into contact and had friendly relations with each other, with the result that little by little they picked up from each other those specialties which had first been invented by their ancestors and which had become proper to them. In other words, the result of the frequent contact of the beings of those two communities was that the Greek beings, borrowing from the Roman beings, all the finesse of their sexual turns, began arranging their what are called Athenian nights, while the Roman beings, having learned from the Greek beings how to cook up sciences, composed their later very famous what is called Roman lore. Okay, so the Greeks made jargon and the Romans made degeneration. And together, with our powers combined, we can ruin humanity. A great deal of time has passed since then. The inventors of both these... It reminds me of Nietzsche kind of lamented Roman Greece. You know, Nietzsche's magnum opus is thus Zarathustra spoke, not thus Plato spoke, or not thus Caesar spoke. He made it a Persian, you know, the prophet of Persia. So it's like he saw Persia, he kind of had Persia in this high regard, and I think he has a line somewhere in his works or in his like letters where he like laments and he says, if only Rome took from Persia what they took from the Greeks. So, you know, the Romans kind of decked out all their gods in the same way, kind of took the aesthetic, and it's like, if only they did that with Persia, we could have had something really brilliant. But alas, the Greeks and Romans became more friends than the Romans and the Persians did. A great deal of time has passed since then. The inventors of both these kinds of being manifestation have already long been destroyed, and their descendants who chance to become powerful have been destroyed also. Never forget, God punished the Romans by turning them into Italians. And now, the contemporary three-brained beings of that planet spend, even with emotion, more than half their existence and being energy acquired somehow or other in absorbing and actualizing unconsciously, and sometimes even consciously, those two ideals. So, just a gay science son or OnlyFans daughter, which one, Anon? The initiators of whose arising were the said bored Asiatic fishermen and shepherds. Oof. Big oof for all of humanity. Well then, my boy. Later on, it seems, when both these groupings of your favorites acquired many of the said efficient means for the successful destruction of the existence of beings like themselves, and when they had become quite expert in persuading, or by the potency of their means compelling, beings of other countries to exchange their inner convictions for those ideals invented by their ancestors, then, as I have said, they first conquered the neighboring communities situated on the continent Europe, and afterwards, for the same purpose, with the help of the hordes they collected during that period, turned towards the continent Asia. And there, already on the continent Asia, they began spreading the maleficent influence of theirs. So, I guess Alexander the Great going into Asia, spreading the influence of the Greeks. First among beings populating the western shores of that continent, in whom, as I have already said, being impulses for a more or less normal being existence had been implanted during centuries, and afterwards they gradually began advancing into the interior. This advance of theirs into the interior of their continent, Asia, proceeded very successfully, and their ranks were constantly being increased, chiefly because the learned beings who had been in Babylon then continued everywhere on the continent Asia to infect the reason beings with their Hannesmusian political ideals. Ideas of Jesus. Oof. Big oof. And they were also helped very much by the fact that there were still preserved in the instincts of the Asiatic beings the results of the influences of the initiates and priests, disciples of the very saintly Ashyata Shamash, who, in their preachings, had inculcated, among other things, one of the chief commandments of Ashyata Shamash, which declared, "Do not kill another, even when your own life is in danger." Damn, Ashyata Shamash was like Thorfinn's dad from Vinland Saga. Ghoul Shadow says, "I think 5 against 1 means masturbation." Lol, there is also a reference to this. The band Pearl Jam. Oh, okay, I didn't know Pearl Jam had that reference. Yeah, I think that became a thing. Profiting by all these former fishermen and shepherds were very easily able to advance, destroying on the way all those who declined to worship the gods they themselves had finally acquired. That is to say, their fantastic science and their phenomenal depravity. There's a lot to say about that. Let's keep moving on. At first, these sowers of evil, for all the three-brained beings there, of all the succeeding generations arising on the continent Europe, and especially the Greeks, moving into the interior of the continent Asia, acted, if slowly, nevertheless effectively. But when some time later there appeared and stood at the head of what is called an army that completely formed arch-vainglorious Greek, the future Hasnamus, Alexander of Macedonia. So he considers Alexander a Hasnamus. I mean, I guess. Okay. Well, let's see what Gurdjieff thinks of Alexander. Then from that time on, there began to proceed that clean sweep of the last remnants of the results of the very saintly intentional labors of our now common cosmic most very saintly Ashyata Shamash. And again, there was resumed, as it is said, the old story. So I think this is a reference to, Alexander burning down the libraries in Persia. But, You know, Alexander was also kind of a friend of mystics and philosophers as well. Just so happened that the Persians were his enemy. Ah, yes, Alexander, the original globalist, says True River King. Yeah, pretty much. Oof. And he destroyed the last vestiges of Ashyat Shaimash. God damn. So much has been lost. Although every time the place of the center of culture of your favorites, those strange three-brained beings, has been changed, and what is called a new civilization has arisen, and each new civilization has brought for the beings of succeeding epochs something both new maleficent. Nevertheless, not one of these numerous civilizations has ever prepared so much evil for the beings of later epochs. Very interesting. Very interesting. Including, of course, the contemporary epoch, as that famous Greco-Roman civilization. So they just created so much evil. The Greco-Roman civilization is just evil incarnate, apparently. I mean, as I said before, like, what's the vestige of this civilization that comes to us now is the Roman Catholic Church, and it's like, I know you think America's corrupt. I know you think, you know, the Pentagon and, you know, Federal Reserve Bank, but I challenge you to think of an institution more corrupt than the Vatican. Like, is there really any competition? Like, they're the oldest, they're the big brother corruption in the world, and it's all they are a direct descendant of this civilization. But nonetheless, without mentioning the large number of other minor psychic features unbecoming to be possessed by three-brained beings and now existing in the presences of your favorites, that civilization is mainly to blame for the complete disappearance from the presences of the three-brained beings of succeeding generations, and especially of the contemporary beings, of the possibility for crystallizing the data for sane logical mentation. Yeah. The Academy, and for engendering the impulse of being self-shame, or true remorse. Namely, the ancient Greek fantastic sciences caused complete atrophy of the former, and the ancient Roman depravity of the latter. In the early period of that Greco-Roman civilization, the said maleficent impulses, which have now become being impulses, namely, and that's lowercase being impulses. So we learnt maleficent things, and they have just been chiseled into us, that as at birth we have instincts in us that are not real. Namely, the passions for inventing fantastic sciences and the passion for depravity were inherent in the Greek and Roman beings alone, and later, when, as I have already said, the beings of both these communities chanced to acquire the said strength and began coming into contact with and influencing the beings of other communities, the beings of many other communities of your unfortunate favorites gradually began to be infected by these peculiar and unnatural being impulses. I don't know, man. Ancient China and Japan may have had some, they have some interesting literature, let's just say. But nonetheless, I get where he's coming from. This took place, on the one hand, as I have already said, owing to the constant influence of both these communities, and on the other hand, owing to that peculiarity of their psyche, common to all the three-brained beings of that planet, and already well fixed in it before this, which is called their imitation. Of course, we are imitators per excellence. And thus, little by little, these inventions of those two ancient communities have brought it about that already at the present time, the psyche of your favorites, shaky enough already before then, has now become so unhinged in all of them without exception that both their world outlook and the whole ordering of their daily existence rests and proceed exclusively on the basis of those two said inventions of the beings of that Greco-Roman civilization, namely on the basis of fantasizing and of striving for sexual gratification. So, OnlyFans and science, the two degenerating influences of our modern time. Here, it is very interesting to notice that although, as I have already told you, thanks to the inheritance from the ancient Romans, organic self-shame or remorse from proper to the three-brained beings, has gradually and entirely disappeared from the presences of your favorites. Nevertheless, there has arisen in them, in its place, something rather like it. In the presences of your contemporary favorites, there is as much as you like of this pseudo-being impulse. Tyler says, edging and gooning, lol. Yeah, exactly. We goon and doom nowadays. Never goon. Never goon, everyone. Which they also call shame, but the data for engendering it, just as all others, are quite singular, so we feel a kind of fake shame or an egoic shame. This being impulse arises in their presences only when they do something which, under their abnormally established conditions of ordinary being existence, is not acceptable to be done by others because we imitate. So we could be doing something that objectively is correct, but because others aren't doing it, we feel shame. But if nobody sees what they do, then nothing they do, even if in their own consciousness and their own feelings it should be undesirable, engenders any such impulse in the end. So that's the other thing. So we could do the most depraved thing in the world, but as long as no one sees it, it's all good. That's the other side of that coin. So you could be gooning and dooming all day and just never feel remorse. The bliss prepared there by the ancient Romans has, in recent times, already so penetrated the nature of your favorites, breeding on all the continents of that ill-fated planet, that it is even difficult to say which beings of which contemporary communities have inherited most from these obliging Romans. R.I.P. the Japanese. But as regards the inheritance passed down from the ancient Greeks, namely the passion for inventing various fantastic sciences, this has not become inherent. Do you think, like, fantasizing about sciences and, like, you know, nerds who are really into D&D and, like, power fantasies and stuff, that's, like, an extension of this, like, psychic peculiarity? Like, Marvel is an outgrowth of the peculiar psyche of the ancient Greeks or something. Anyway, this has not become inherent to all the three-brained beings of contemporary times equally, but it has passed down only to certain beings arising among the beings of all the contemporary large and small communities, breeding on all the terra firma parts of the surface of that peculiar planet. Proportionately, this passion, namely to invent fantastic sciences, has passed down from the ancient Greeks mainly to the beings of the contemporary community existing there under the name of Germany. Uh-oh. The beings of that contemporary Germany can be boldly called the direct heirs of ancient Greek civilization. Nietzsche, is that you? And they can be so called because at the present time it is just they who chiefly bring every kind of new science and invention into contemporary civilization. There's that, like, post someone made and they said something like, the English don't understand science. Science has never spoken English. It spoke ancient Greek. It spoke Greek in ancient times. It spoke Latin in medieval times. And for a short time, it spoke German. But it has never spoken English. And that's why the Anglosphere is, like, uncivilized or something. And I'm like, huh. It's the Germans are this direct descendants. So Marshall Esotericist has something to say. He says, yeah, maybe he is critiquing the source Reddit types. Yeah, maybe. Maybe when he's like the fantastic scientists. This is very interesting about Germany being the inheritors of ancient Greece. And a lot of the perversions and fantastic creations are now coming from out of Germany, or at least at this point in time. But that is the point in time where Gurdjieff wrote this book. Very interesting. Unfortunately, my boy, the beings of that contemporary community, Germany, have in many respects, as it is said, surpassed the beings of ancient Greece. Yeah, Hegel definitely surpassed Aristotle in just being completely abstruse and illegible. Thanks to the sciences invented by the ancient Greeks, only the being mentation. Parser Persian says, hi Parser. Being mentation of other beings was spoiled and still continues to be spoiled. We don't even think right. We're just dumb. We're just retarded. But in addition to this, the contemporary beings of the community Germany have become very skillful also in inventing those sciences, thanks to which the said specific disease there was of wiseacring has been very widely spread. among other of your favorites, and during the process of this disease in them, many of them semi-consciously or even quite automatically chance to notice some small detail of the common cosmic process which actualizes everything existing, and afterwards, informing others of it, they together use it for some of their, as they are called, new inventions, thereby adding to the number of those new means, of which during the last 2 of their centuries so many have accumulated there, that their total effect has now already become what is called the resultant decomposing force, in contradistinction to what is called the resultant creative force of nature. Center the resulting decomposing force. Is there like a... There's been a flippity floop somewhere. The resulting decomposing force in contradistinction to what is called... Okay, let's see what he says. Let's see what he says. And indeed, my boy, owing merely to the sciences invented by the beings of the contemporary Germany, other 3-brained beings of your planet belonging to both that same community and to other communities have now acquired the possibility of inventing, and now they almost every day invent here and there some such new invention or new means, and employing them... Wait a second. Resultant decomposing force and resultant creative force of nature. Is this dialectics? Is this what we're talking about? Acquired possibility of inventing, and now they almost every day invent here, there, some new invention or new means, and employing them in the process of their existence, have now already brought it about that that poor nature there, already enfeebled without this, through no fault of her own, is scarcely able to actualize what are called her evolutionary and involutionary processes. For your clear representation, so things are just stuck in their place in nature now. Nature is stuck and can't flow anymore. For your clear representation and better understanding how these contemporary direct hairs have surpassed their ligators, I must now explain to you also about certain widely used means existing there at the present time, which owe their existence exclusively to these nature-helping direct hairs of ancient Greece. Nature helping, and inverted commas. I will explain to you certain of these means there now existing and in use everywhere, which have been invented in beings of that contemporary community in Germany. Okay, let's see this. Explain, Gurdjieff. I should like first to emphasize, by the way, one very odd phenomenon, namely that these contemporary substitutes for the ancient Greeks give names to their said maleficent inventions, names for which, for some reason or other, end in "ein." As examples of the very many particularly maleficent inventions of those German beings, let us take just those 5, what are called chemical substances, now existing there, under the names of satkanine, alanine, cocaine, atropine, and alisarin. I only recognize one of those. I assume, because of this, that the others are of a similar, have a family resemblance. I assume 1, 2, 4, and 5 have a family resemblance to number 3. Moving on. Which chemical substances are used there at the present time by the beings of all the continents and islands of our dear Mullah Nasser ad-Din says, even without any economizing. So they just give it away for free. CIA, where's my free... Anyway, the first of the enumerated means, specially invented by the German beings, namely satkanine, is nothing else but samukururaza. Samukururaza. Okay. It's none other, of course. That is to say, one of those 7 what are called neutralizing gases, which arise and are always present in the common presence of each planet, and which take part in the completed crystallization of every definite surplanetary and infraplanetary formation. and which in separate states are always and everywhere what are called indiscriminate destroyers of the already arisen. So is this like a gas bomb? About this German invention, I once also learned there, among other things, that when one of those beings of that community, for reasons I recently described, happened to obtain this gas from some surplanetary and intraplanetary definite formations, and noticed in the said way its particularity, and told several others about it, then owing to the fact that there was then proceeding in the presences of the beings of their community, consequently in themselves what is called the most intense experiencing of the chief particularity of the psyche of the three-brained beings of your planet, namely, the urgent need to destroy the existence of others like themselves, and indeed, the beings of that community were then fully absorbed in their process of reciprocal destruction with the beings of neighboring communities. These others thereupon at once enthusiastically decided to devote themselves entirely to finding means to employ the special property of that gas for the speedy mass destruction of the existence of the beings of other communities. Oof. Having begun their practical researches with this aim in view, one of them soon discovered that if this gas is concentrated in a pure state, in such a way that it could be freely liberated in any given space at any time, it could easily be employed for the mentioned aim. That was sufficient. From then on, this gas, artificially isolated from the general harmony of actualization of everything existing, began to be liberated in a certain way into space by all the other ordinary beings of that community during the processes of reciprocal destruction, just when and just where the greatest number of beings of other, as they are called, hostile communities were grouped. Okay, he threw gas bomb. Bomb exploded. People died. Enemy died. When this isolated, particularly poisonous cosmic substance is intentionally liberated into the atmosphere under the said conditions, and when striving to reblend with other corresponding cosmic substances, it happens to enter the planetary bodies of three-brained beings nearby, it instantly and completely destroys their existence, or at best permanently injures the functioning of one or other part of their common presence. Big oof. The second of the chemical substances I enumerated, namely aniline, is that chemical coloring substance by means of which most of those surplanetary formations can be dyed, from which the three-brained beings there make all kinds of objects they need in the process of their ordinary existence. So it's a kind of dye. Although thanks to that invention, your favorites can now dye any objects any color, yet what lastingness of the existence of these objects become, just there lies their famous Bismarck's pet cat. Okay, this is a reference. Otto von Bismarck had a pet cat, and this is a clear reference, which I'm not getting. What does this mean? What do you mean, Gurdjieff? Reveal to me your secrets, Gurdjieff. Oscar from Unsinkable Sam. What? Oscar was a... No. Okay, no, this is something different. Who was the cat that survived Bismarck? Oh, no, it is Oscar. Unsinkable Sam. Okay, what? Known by his nickname Unsinkable Sam, or by Germanized spelling Oskar, was a ship's cat who purportedly served during World War II with both Kriegsmarine and the Royal Navy and survived the sinking of 3 ships. Oh my god! Unsinkable Sam, epic cat. What was that reference then? Although thanks to that invention of your favorites, can now dye any color yet. What the lastingness of the existence of these objects becomes, just there lies their famous Bismarck's pet cat. I don't understand that reference. What is he saying? The things that they die last, or it's dumb that they die things because they don't last? Good old. That's a funny little tidbit there. I didn't know Bismarck had a cat called Unsinkable Sam. Or it's not. It was called Oscar, wasn't it? And they just renamed it Unsinkable Sam. Hey. We got Akash entering the chat, dropping 20 somethings. Thank you, Oscar. Thank you, Akash, sorry. That was a little thank you for your super. Alrighty. Let's keep this rolling. Before the maleficent alanine existed, why is it maleficent? The objects produced by your favorites for their ordinary existence, such for instance as what are called carpets, pictures, and various articles of wool, wood, and skin, were dyed with simple vegetable dyes, which they had learned during centuries how to obtain. and these just enumerated objects would formerly last from 5 to 10 or even 15 of their centuries. Ah, but now, thanks merely to aniline or to dyes of other names into which this same aniline enters as the basis, there remains of the objects dyed with new colors at most after about 30 years, only perhaps the memory of them. So it's a shit dye that capitalists use to trick us. And it just fades really quickly. I must also say that the beings of the contemporary community Germany have been the cause not only that thanks to this maleficent aniline, the productions of all the contemporary beings of this planet are quickly destroyed, but also that productions from ancient times have almost ceased to exist on that ill-fated planet. This latter occurred because, for various Hasnamusian purposes and for their famous, as they call them, scientific aims, they collected the surviving ancient productions from all countries, and not knowing how to preserve ancient objects, they only hastened their speedy destruction. But they used and still use those antiques they collected as models for cheap goods, which are everywhere known on that ill-fated planet by the name of ersatz. A product made or used as a substitute, typically inferior. Okay, so ersatz. Where is this from? Not real. So it's kind of like faux. I was thinking faux. Faux is French. What is the etymology of ersatz? Where does that come from? Such a weird word. That doesn't look Greek or Latin. As for the third of the enumerated chemical substances they invented, namely cocaine, Drew River King says ersatz equals false. Yes. Indeedy do. Someone look up the linguistics for that and tell me about it. The etymology, sorry, not the linguistics, what am I talking about? The etymology for the word ersatz. Cocaine, that chemical substance, is not only also of great assistance to nature in more rapidly decomposing the planetary formations, in this instance, their own planetary bodies, but this chemical means has an effect on the psyche of the contemporary beings of that planet Earth, surprisingly similar to that which the famous organ Kundebuffer had on the psyche of their ancestors. Ersatz is German. Okay, that's interesting. Thank you, Marshall, esotericist. That's really weird. Okay, sorry. Now, gotta concentrate. But this chemical means has an effect on the psyche of contemporary beings of the planet Earth, surprisingly similar to which the famous organ Kundebuffer had on the psyche of their ancestors. Oh, wow. Cocaine is a chemical Kundebuffer. When their ancestors had that invention in themselves of the great angel Luisos, then, thanks to this organ, they were always exactly in the same state as the contemporary beings are when they introduce into themselves this German invention called cocaine. Whoa! That's crazy! So the Kundebuffer is cocaine. Bro, this explains so much. Oh my god, so that means businessmen who do this a lot are just pure Kundebuffer Hasnamusens. Oh my god. Oh my god, this explains everything. See, that just clicked in my head. That's just beautiful. Oh my god. I must warn you, my boy, that even if the action of that German invention is similar to the actions of the famous organ Kundebuffer, it happened without any conscious intention on the part of the contemporary beings of the community Germany. They became colleagues of the great angel Luisos only by chance. At the present time, almost all the beings who become genuine representatives of contemporary civilization very meticulously and with the greatest delight and tenderness introduce into themselves this blessing of contemporary civilization, of course, always to the glory, as our dear Mullah Nassereddin says, of the cloven hoofed. So this is cocaine, so it's amphetamines, really. All amphetamines are basically chemical Kundebuffers. That's crazy. Write that down. Write that down. The fourth of the enumerated chemical substances, namely atropine, is also everywhere there in great demand at the present time for a great variety of purposes. Okay, let's see what this is. They've all been different, actually. And my first assessment was completely wrong. But its most common use is for a certain exceedingly strange purpose. It seems that thanks to the same abnormally established conditions, they're of ordinary being existence, their organ of sight has acquired the property of regarding the faces of others as good and pleasing only when they have dark eyes. Oh, is this mascara? Is that what atropine is? And when this chemical substance called atropine is in a certain way introduced into the eyes of beings, the pupils become dilated and darker. Oh, what the hell is this? And because of this, most of them introduce this atropine into their eyes in order that their faces may appear good and pleasing to others. I don't know, man. Everybody seems to want those baby blues, especially nowadays. And truly, my dear boy, those terrestrial beings who introduce this German blessing into their eyes do have very dark eyes until they are 45. Was this a fashion back in the day, maybe? Like back when Gurdjieff was around, people were darkening their eyes? I said until 45 because so far there has never been a case there when a being using this means could see and still continues its use after the age of 45. Alicerine, the fifth and last of the enumerated inventions, is also widespread everywhere, and that blessing of contemporary civilization is used there chiefly by what are called confectioners, and other specialists who prepare for other beings of that planetary most tastely articles for their food. So this one's going to be what, sugar or like fructose corn syrup? I will not drink the corn syrup. I hate alicerine. I hate the Antichrist. True River King says Roman women used to put lemon juice in their eyes to make them sparkle. Oh, okay. Yeah, I've heard used to put lemon juice also. There's like that old fad of putting lemon juice in your hair to make it more blonde or something. That's crazy. But anyway, the whole idea is it's a type of cosmetic that actually destroys you. And you know, what's the thing of like putting foundation? Nowadays, everyone's into natural care. But there was like, you know, putting foundation on that actually blocks your pores and kind of ruins your skin. So you need more foundation for next time. Things like that. I think that's all of that falls into the fourth category. Basically, things that are supposed to make you beautiful but actually destroy you. There's a kind of a thing in, was the Terry Gilliam movie? The movie Brazil? Where it's like there's those two women characters that they both go to like different scientists to get like different de-aging things, and one woman becomes younger and younger in each of the scenes, and one woman becomes older and older. And it's like the beauty therapy sometimes works, but beauty therapy and others, it just ages them and destroys them. But they delude themselves into thinking it's going to work at any moment now. Anyway, we're talking about tasty food. So high fructose corn syrup to Gurdjieff is the fifth blessing of civilization. Oof. The confectioners and other professionals there who prepare the said tasty articles for the first food of the rest of your favorites use this same German surefire composition, alicerine, of course unconsciously for that purpose, which has there already finally become the ideal for the whole of contemporary civilization. Is this sugar or syrup, or is this just a kind of commentary on all adding like products into like just food to make it artificial? Which purpose is expressed in the language of our honored Mullah Nasser Eddin in the following words: as long as everything looks fine and dandy to me, what does it matter if the grass doesn't grow? Did Mullah Nasser Eddin really say that? I don't know, Gurdjieff. I don't know. Tyler says, I love that movie. Yeah. Brazil was a great movie. I mean, it was sad ending, but great movie. That's one of the rare cases where like the Americans clipped the ending so they don't have the dark plot twist. And I was like, yeah, I like to go with that one. Anyhow, my boy, these contemporary substitutes for the beings of ancient Greece are already now a great help to poor nature, though only in the process of decomposition. With all their practical attainments based on the sciences they have themselves invented, it is not for nothing that our dear Mullah Nasser Eddin has the following wise expression: better pull 10 hairs a day out of your mother's head than not help nature. I don't know about these Mullah Nasser Eddin sayings anymore. True River King says, what this is all about is a particular expression of points on the octave, which is explained in chapter 40. Okay. Ooh. Ooh, so we just got to bracket ourselves, hold ourselves tight until chapter 40. So strictly speaking, the capacity to cook up fantastic sciences and to devise new methods for ordinary being existence there did not pass from the ancient Greeks to the beings of that contemporary Germany alone. The same capacity was perhaps no less also inherited by the beings of another contemporary community, also an independent one, and also in her turn enjoying dominion. Other contemporary community of your favorites is called England. Let's see what he says about the British. Let's see what Gurdjieff thinks about the British. There has even passed from ancient Greece to the beings of that second contemporary community, England, and directly to them alone, one of their most maleficent inventions, which the beings of that community, or that contemporary community, have most thoroughly adopted and now actualize in practice. This particularly maleficent invention of theirs, the ancient Greeks called diaphron, and the contemporary beings call sport. Oh, okay, that's interesting. What's wrong with sports, bruh? About this contemporary sport there I shall explain to you in as much detail, I guess he's going to say, in as much detail as possible at the end of my tale. But you must meanwhile know that though the beings of that community England also now invent large quantities of the various new objects required by your favourites in the process of their ordinary being existence, nevertheless they do not invent chemical substances like the beings of the contemporary community Germany. No, they invent chiefly what are called metalwares. How times have changed. Especially in recent times, they have become expert in inventing and in distributing to the beings existing over the whole of the surface of your planet vast quantities of every kind of metalwares called their locks, razors, mouse traps, revolvers, scythes, machine guns, saucepans, hinges, guns, penknives, cartridges, pens, mines, needles, and many other things of the same kind. And ever since the beings of this contemporary community started inventing these practical objects, the ordinary existence of the three-brained beings of your planet has been, just as our dear Mullah Nasruddin says, not life, but free jam. You see, I'm really starting to doubt these Mullah Nasruddin sayings now. They just make me laugh now. The beings of that contemporary community have been the benefactors of the other contemporary beings of your planet, offering them, as they say, oh my god, this isn't even a Gurdjieff word and I'm throwing it. Philanthropic aid. There we go. Got him. Especially as regards their first being duty, namely the duty of carrying out from time to time the process of reciprocal destruction. So we need to supply aid to these this small community here. Let's bring them these were the first bringing democracies, except they bring them monarchy and empire. Thanks to them, the discharge of that being duty of theirs has gradually become, for your contemporary favorites, the merest trifle. In the absence of those inventions, it used to be exceedingly arduous for these poor favorites of yours to fulfill that being duty, because they were formerly forced to spend a good deal of sweat for it. But thanks to the adaptations of every kind invented by those contemporary beings, it is now, as again our esteemed Mullah Nasruddin says, just roses. Rosebud. The contemporary beings now scarcely need to make any effort whatsoever in order to destroy completely the existence of beings like themselves. Yeah, we just throw bombs at each other. Sometimes, sitting quietly in what they call their smoking rooms, they can destroy, just as a pastime, as it were tens, and sometimes even hundreds of others like themselves. So mechanized war has replaced actual war. Now we don't do the fighting anymore, machines fight for us. I might as well now, I think, tell you a little about the still existing direct descendants of the beings of the mentioned Greek-Roman civilizations. Okay, let's learn about them. The descendants of these beings, of the once great and powerful community Greece there, still continue to exist, and also to have their own independent community, but for the other independent communities there, they have at the present time scarcely any significance whatever. They already no longer do as their ancestors did there, who were supreme specialists in cooking up all kinds of fantastic sciences, for if a contemporary Greek cooked up a new science, the beings of the other communities of the present time would not pay the smallest attention. And they would pay no attention to it, chiefly because that community has not at the present time enough of what are called guns and ships to be, for the other contemporary beings there, what is called an authority. But through the descendants of the former great Greeks, namely the Greeks of the present time, have lost the trick of being what is called an imagined authority. For other three-brained beings there, they have now perfectly adapted themselves there on almost all the continents and islands to keep what are called shops, where without any haste, slowly and gently, they trade in what are called sponges, halva, rahat lochum, Turkish delight, etc., and sometimes Persian dried fruit. I love a little bit of halva in the morning, not gonna lie. Never forgetting the dried fish called kefal. And as for the descendants of the famous Romans, although they too continue to arise and exist, they no longer even bear the name of their ancestors, though they still call the chief place of their community by the name Rome. The contemporary beings of that community formed by the descendants of those former shepherds afterwards, the great Romans, are called by the other beings there Italians. God punished the Romans by making them Italians. Except for that specific being impulse, which the ancient Roman beings were the first on that planet to crystallize in their presences, and which spread gradually to all the other three-brained beings of that planet. Scarcely anything else has been passed by inheritance from their ancestors to these beings called Italians. Is he calling Italians wankers in a really advanced way? That's kind of impressive of Gurdjieff. The beings of that contemporary community, Italy, exist at the present time very quietly and peacefully. Very quietly. I don't think Gurdjieff ever met Italians. Doing nothing more than unostentatiously inventing ever new forms of their harmless and very innocent, what is called macaroni. They just, sit at the side just making pasta. That's hilarious. That's hilarious, dude. I wonder how many nationalities, have read Gurdjieff's Beelzebub tales and have gotten here and just been, absolutely offended. That's so funny. Nevertheless, there had passed to certain beings of that contemporary Italy by hereditary from their ancestors one very peculiar property called giving pleasure to others. Only they manifest this inherited need, that is to say, this giving pleasure, not towards beings there like themselves, but to beings of other forms. It must, in fairness, be stated that is this like a sheep joke? Like in Australia, we always make fun of New Zealanders. In England, they make fun of Welsh people for doing it. Is this going to be a sheep joke? I'm guessing this is going to be a sheep joke. Let's put some money down. If this is a sheep joke, everyone give me a super. It must in fairness be stated that the special property passed to beings of various parts of contemporary Italy, not from the great Romans alone, this inherited property became more naturalized by their ancestors of considerably later epochs, namely at the time when they began spreading among other beings, both of their own community and of the neighboring weaker communities. The doctrines already changed for their egoistic purposes of a certain genuine sacred messenger from above. At the present time, the beings of various parts of contemporary Italy actualize this property by giving pleasure to others in the following way. The existence of the quadruped beings called sheep. It's a sheep joke. It's a sheep joke. Called it! Called it! Oh! That's it, baby. And goats. And goats. Let's get it. Let's go. Let's go. Whose planetary bodies they also use for their first food. They do not destroy all at once, but in order to give this pleasure, they do it slowly and gently over a period of many days. That is to say, one day, they take off one leg, then a few days later a second. Oh my god, this is what the hell? And so on for as long as the sheep goats still breathe. Oh, what the hell is this? this some kind of weird guru manga he's been reading? Gurdjieff, bro. And sheep and goats can breathe without the said parts of their common presences for a very long time, because in the main functions of the taking in of cosmic substances for the possibility of existing, these cosmic substances for the possibility of existing, these parts do not participate, though they do participate in the functions which actualize those impulses giving self-sensations. Ew, that just got dark there. After what I have already said, there seems no need to say any more about the descendants of those Romans who were once so menacing and so great for the other communities there. Oof. Now, let us talk about the particularly maleficent invention of the ancient Greeks, which is being actualized and practiced at the present time by the beings of the contemporary community there called England, and which invention they call sport. Not only hey, Tyler paying up with a super 10 USD. Thank you very much, Tyler. Not only have the beings of the contemporary community England, namely those beings who chiefly actualize during the process of their ordinary existence, this particularly maleficent invention of the ancient Greeks added, thanks to its maleficent consequences, one more surefire factor for shortening the duration of their existence. Already, so playing sport just shortens their existence. Are they going to talk about rugby here, or are they going to talk about boxing or something? Or is this just an Olympic Games kind of thing he's making fun of? I guess did the Olympics exist when Gurdjieff was around? Anyway, already trifling enough without that, but also experiencing in their turn at the present time the greatness of their community. They are in consequence authorities for the other three-brained beings there, and furthermore, because they have made the actualizing of the invention in practice their ideal and its spreading their aim, they at the present time, by every possible means, strongly infect the beings of all other large and small communities of that ill-fated planet with that invention of theirs. Is it cricket? Is it rugby? Is it boxing? We'll see. The basis for that very serious misconception there was the disappearance from the common presences of those favorites of yours of the possibility of the crystallization in them of those factors which actualize logical mentation in three-brained beings. Ugh. So the destruction... oh, thank you, Mr. Martial Esotericist. I'm broke, but I must pay respect to the prediction. Thank you, Martial Esotericist. The basis for... Thank you for your... 5 USD. Excellent. So, the basis for the very serious misconception there was the disappearance from the common presences of those favorites of yours, of the possibility of the crystallization in them, of those factors. Yeah, so this is interesting. They destroyed true logical mentation. The Greeks destroyed true logical mentation, natural being mentation in us. And then one of the consequences of that is being obsessed with sports, or like making sports your entire personality now. That's interesting. And in consequence of the absence in them of this logical mentation, all of them, almost without exception, merely because certain candidates for has namus there have asserted that they could obtain something good for themselves by means of this sport. So this is also like, you know how kind of what do you call it? Like UFC stars, boxers, it's almost like a human cockfighting in a sense, where the agents are all Hasnamuses, and the people fighting are just, some of them may be good, some of them may be Hasnamuses themselves, but you know, they're all basically being abused by their agents. An assertion they believe with all their presence have now, in the hope of attaining this same something, given themselves up entirely to that sport. None of these unfortunates know, and probably never will reflect, that not only is nothing good obtained by them from this maleficent sport of theirs, but they, as I have already told you, solely owing to this sport alone, still further shorten the duration of their existence, which is already sufficiently trifling without this. So, That you may better represent to yourself and understand why the duration of their existence is being still further diminished on account of this sport, it is now opportune to explain to you a little more in detail about what I have already promised to explain to you. Yes, please. Namely, the difference between the duration of being existence according to the Fulas-Nit-Amnian principle and according to the Itoklonas principle. Yeah. Itoklanos. Itoklanos principle. There we go. I got it. I got there eventually. You remember that when I explained to you how these favorites of yours define the flow of time, I said that when the organ Kundabuffer with all its properties was removed from their presences, and they began to have the same duration of existence as all normal three-brained beings arising everywhere in our universe. That is, according to what is called the Fulas-Nit-Amnian principle. They also, so we used to, humans, we just categorize as animals now, but a human being should be a completely different categorization. And in the same, we should be different from animals in the same way that, you know, plants are different from minerals. Animals are way different from plants. And then, like, humans should be completely different from animals, but really we're almost the same as animals, even in duration of our lifespan to some of them. The only thing that's different from us is our reason. We can kind of reason and make jet planes and cocaine and weird stuff. So something has happened. They also should then have existed without fail under their second being body, without fail until their second being body Kesgen had been completely coated in them and finally perfected by reason up to the sacred Ishmech. So a human used to just live like really long periods of time, maybe 100, maybe 1,000 years, and your being body would coat kind of automatically. Now it doesn't coat automatically, and also we die. We die way before it could even coat automatically. But later, when they began existing in a manner more and more unbecoming for three-brained beings and entirely ceased actualizing in their presences, their being parkdolg duty, foreseen by great nature, by means of which alone it is possible for three-brained beings to acquire in their presences the data for coating their said higher parts. So we need data to coat higher parts. So I always like to concentrate. Ooh, where am I? I always like to concentrate now. Whenever he starts talking about higher being bodies, that's when you concentrate. That's when he drops some. That's when he usually drops stuff. Good old Gurgy-Burgy. By great nature, by means of which alone it is possible for three-brained beings to acquire in their presences the data for coating their said higher parts, and when in consequence of all of this, the quality of their radiations failed to respond to the demands of the most great common cosmic trogo-auto-egocratic process. Then great nature was compelled, for the purpose of equalizing vibrations, gradually to actualize the duration. Oh, because that's the other thing. Nature can't. We don't supply nature with energy anymore. She only gets nature from us when we die. So she just has to balance it out by giving us shorter lives, so we die more often. Compelled for the purpose of equalizing vibrations, gradually to actualize the duration of their existence, according to the principle called Itoklanos. That is the principle upon which, in general, is actualized the duration of existence of one-brained and two-brained beings who have not the same possibilities as the three-brained beings, and who are therefore unable to actualize in their presences the said foreseen by nature parkdolg duty. According to this principle, the duration of being existence, and also the whole of the contents of their common presences, are in general acquired from the results arising from the following 7 actualizations surrounding them, namely from 1. Heredity, 2. Conditions and environments at the moment of conception. So not birth, conception. So if it was a rainy day when your parents boned, all of that watery energy is gonna seep within you, I guess. Just let me read this previous bit. According to the principle, the duration of being existence and also the whole of the contents of their common presences are in general acquired from the results arising from... Okay. So how long you live and the content of your personality, not your essence, but your personality is judged by these 7 things. 1, hereditary. 3, conditions in the environment at the moments of conceptions. Maybe this can include some kind of zodiacal influence. 3, the combination of the radiations of all the planets of their solar system during the formation in the womb of their productress. Okay, so the conditions of the environment is more weather, that kind of thing. And then there's the planetary zodiacal forces. 4, the degree of being manifestation of their producers during the period they are attaining the age of responsible being. Sorry, what was that? The degree of being manifestation of their producers, so their parents. So the degree of being manifestation that your parents have also dictate how long kind of you live, and also the content of your personality. So most people, they don't have much being development. They are man 1, 2, and 3. But if 2 fourth men or 2 fifth men or 2 man number 6, well, if a man and a woman happen to reach, being number 7, man number 7, the 7th degree or a high degree of development, and they have a kid, that kid is going to have completely different opportunities than just, a man number 1 and a wife number 2 would have, of their child of reaching. So number 5, the quality of being, existence of being similar to themselves around them. So your net worth is your net worth. So your friends, your family, you're influenced by them. We live in a society, and we're influenced by that. 6, the quality of what are called, damn it, Gurdjieff, teleokrimalnichnian thought waves formed in the atmosphere surrounding them also during their period of attaining the age of majority. That is, the sincerely manifested good wishes and actions on the part of what are called the beings of the same blood. Okay, so the thought waves of people surrounding you, but specifically your family. So what your family think of you actually influences you. Actually is one of the main things out of the 7. They are one of the things that actually influences your lifespan and also the content of your personality. That's interesting. That's a hot take from Gurdjieff. The quality of what are called the being egoplastic chori of the given being himself, that is, his being efforts for the transubstantiation in himself of all the data for obtaining objective reason. There you go. So your own efforts for self-actualization will also have an effect on that. The chief particularity of existence, according to this principle, itoklanos, is that in the presences of beings existing according to it, dependent upon the enumerated 7 exterior actualizations, there are crystallized in their being localizations, so your centers, which represent in beings the central places of the sources of actualization. 6, I should call my dad, says Tyler. Maybe. Which represent in beings the central places of their sources of actualization of all the separate independent parts of their common presence, or, as your favorites would say, in their brains. So we have an intellectual brain, an emotional brain, and a motor instinctual brain. So their brains, or what are called bobbin candle knots. So bobbin, think of a bobbin as like what a thread rolls around that sewing machines used to have on them, at least. Candle. That's interesting. This word, bobbin, what a thread has a candle. Candle is time duration, burning, kind of burning down, and then knots. So there's a principle called bobbin candle knots. That is to say, something that gives in the given localization of your brains a definite quantity of possible associations or experiencings. So you have an amount of you have a quantity of possibilities. It's like the main, True River King says, it's like the main spring in a watch is your bobbin candle knots. That's interesting, but you have 3 different ones for your different being centers, or being localizations. So in your intellectual brain, your emotional brain, and your motor instinctual brain, you'll have a different bobbin candle knots. And so, my boy, Because these contemporary favorites of yours, these three-brained beings of the planet Earth, already arise only according to the principle itoklanos, therefore, from the moment of conception up to the age of responsible being, there are crystallized in their brains these bobbin candle knots with very definite possibilities of actualizing the processes of association. Grants Get Out says, "My boy." Yep. Yes. That's I feel like there's something about the words "my boy" that he is almost like a mental resetting. Like as you read it, he says, "And so, my boy," and that kind of knocks you back to consciousness to try and get your attention back online. For the great elucidation of this question, and for your better understanding, and also not to waste time on the explanations concerning the essence itself, and also the forms of functioning of such definite cosmic realizations, these just mentioned bobbin candle knots, which are lawfully crystallized in the locations of brains of those beings who exist only on the basis of itoklanos, I intend to take as an elucidating example just those jamtesternokhi. I almost got that until that last bit, nokhi. Jamtesternokhi. God damn, that's a tough one. How does he come up with these? Oh my god. Such as your favorites also have, and which they call mechanical watches. Oh my god. Okay, this is what True River King was talking about. To elucidate example. So it's the mainspring. The bobbin candle is like the mainspring in a mechanical watch. As you already know, although such jamtesternokhi, or mechanical watches, are of different what are called systems, yet they are all constructed on the same principle of tension or pressure of the unwinding spring. One system of jamtesternokhi, or mechanical watch, contains a spring exactly calculated and arranged, so that the length of the duration of its tension from unwinding may be sufficient for 24 hours. Another system has a spring for a week, a third for a month, and so on. Okay, this is very interesting. So the bobbin candle knots this is very interesting stuff. We should pay attention to this. In the brains of beings existing only according to the principle itoklanos corresponds to the spring and the mechanical watches of various systems. So we are not just one thing, we're an overlaying of systems. Just as the duration of the movement of mechanical watches depends upon the spring they contain, so the duration of the existence of beings depends exclusively on the bobbin candle knots. So just like how a watch runs out and you need to retwist it, I'll print the principle of bobbin candle knots. When we run out of that spring, we dissolve, we die. Raskuano, the process of Raskuano begins. And so that's interesting when he was talking before about beings dying in parts. If you have too many qualities of the Hasnamusin in you, you die in parts. It's like one of your centers dies, one of your centers runs out of bobbin candle knots, it doesn't respring. And so it just stops. Formed in their brains during their arising and during the process of their further formation. Just as the spring of a watch has a winding of a definite duration, so these beings also can associate experience only as much as the possibilities for experience put into them by nature during the crystallization of those same bobbin candle knots in their brains. So there's also a kind of a limit so you can it's interesting that you may be able to retwist some of the springs and live longer, but there's also even a limit to that depending on how the springs, the springs and the mechanics that nature has given us actually work. They can associate consequently exist just so much and not whit more nor less. As mechanical watches can act as long as the spring has what is called the tension of winding, so the beings in whose brains the said bobbin candle knots are crystallized can experience and consequently exist until these bobbin candle knots formed in their brains owing to the mentioned 7 external conditions are used up. So maybe think of now the brains as kind of like cups filled with a fuel, and if we run out of a fuel in the cup, it just ends. And so, my boy, as the results of Park Dog duty, where no longer thereafter obtained in the presences of your favorites, and the duration of their existence began to depend exclusively on the results of the 7 accidentally arranged external conditions I have just enumerated. So those 7 external conditions dictate our Bob and Candlenos, but it used to be much longer, or a completely different principle. The full Nastamnian principle would give us much longer lives. Then, thanks to all this, the length of their existence, especially among the contemporary beings, has become very varied. At the present time, the duration of their existence may be from 1 of their minutes up to 70 or 90 of their years, and so on, owing, take a shot, to all I have just said. However, your favorites may exist, whatever measures they may adopt, and even if, as they say, they should put themselves in a glass case, as soon as the contents of the Bob and Candlenos crystallized in their brains are used up, one or another of their brains immediately ceases function. So as soon as so these are maybe like fuel containers that go into the brains, and as soon as one of them is used up, it doesn't get rewinded. It seems one of your brains just stops. So usually the rational brain stops, and then the mammalian brain, the emotional brain stops, and then finally the motor instinctual brain will stop and you die. The differences between mechanical watches and your contemporary favorites is only that in mechanical watches there is 1 spring, while your favorites have 3 of these independent Bob and Candlenos, and they're independent. So one of the things is we need to become balanced. Are we going to balance these, or have them all balanced so they're at the same kind of length? What is he going to say? What is he going to say? And these independent Bob and Candlenos in all the 3 independent localizations in 3-brained beings have the following names. The first, the Bob and Candlenos of the thinking center. The second, Bob and Candlenos of the feeling center. The third, the Bob and Candlenos of the moving center. Even that fact, which I have recently often repeated, namely that the process of the sacred Rasguano is actualized for these 3 favorites of yours in thirds, or as they themselves would say, they begin to die in parts, proceeds also from the fact that arising and being formed only according to the principle of itoklanos, and existing non-harmoniously, they disproportionately use up the contents, namely their Bob and Candlenos of these 3 separate independent brains, and hence it is that such a horrible dying as is not proper to the 3-brained beings frequently occurs in them. Grant Gets Out says the 3 Dantians. Yeah, could be a little Taoism. There's I know one I forgot the guy's name. There's one Gurdjieff teacher who's big on like Taoism as well. You know how like some Gurdjieff teachers are like, I teach Gurdjieff, but I'm also a crypto-orthodox guy, or I teach Gurdjieff, but I'm also into Zen. There's one guy who's like, I teach Gurdjieff, but he's also like really into Taoism. And there is some like overlay there. There's some interesting, like Gurdjieff's stuff himself, a lot of it's clearly a synthesis of like a bunch of other systems. He's kind of gone into a bunch of other systems, like gotten the fragments out of them that are real, and kind of burnt away the fat and reorganized it into his own kind of system, which then you can then see the associations and connections into many other traditions in the world. It's very interesting. During my stay there, among them, I personally very often constated their dying by thirds. This was possible because although in the presences of your favorites, especially the contemporary ones, the Bob and Candlenos of one of their brains may be entirely used up, nevertheless, the beings themselves would sometimes continue to exist for a long time. Grant Gets Out says, I'm just fragmented, my boy. Yes. For instance, it often happens there that owing to their specifically abnormal existence, the contents of one of the Bob and Candlenos may be used up in one of them, and if it is of the moving center, or as they call it themselves, the spinal brain, then although such a contemporary 3-brained being there continues to think and feel, yet he has already lost the possibility of intentionally directing the parts of his planetary body. So think of like old sportsmen who are just completely used up, but what happens to old sportsmen? They then become commentators. Oh boy. Here it is interesting to notice that when one of your contemporary favorites already partially dies for good in this way, then their contemporary Zerlichners, or as they are called, physicians, look upon such a death as most certainly a disease, and with every kind of wiseacring that has become proper to them, start treating it. And they give these supposed diseases every sort of name consonant with an ancient language utterly known to them called Latin. So most diseases are really just effects of the centers dying. The very widely spread diseases there have such names as the following: hemiplegia, paraplegia, paralysis, progressiva essentialis, tabes dorsalis, paralysis, agitans, sclerosis, disseminita, and so on and so forth. Thank God we're over that. Such deaths by thirds there on the planet Earth, which has taken your fancy, have occurred particularly frequently during the last 2 centuries, and they occur to those of your favorites who, thanks either to their profession or to one of their what are called passions, arising and acquired by the beings belonging to all large and small communities there on account of the same abnormally arranged conditions of their ordinary being existence, have, during their being existence, lived through, in a greater or smaller degree, the contents of the bobbin candle knots of one or another of their being brains. So because we also live unbalanced lives, like man number 1 lives almost always through the motor instinctual being brain, that's what runs out first. That's another reason why it's not good to be man 1, 2, or 3. So man number 2 lives primarily through the emotional being brain. So they live through their emotions, they solve all of their problems through their emotions, and that being brain is the one that exhausts first. That principle, Bobbin Candlenose principle, exhausts first. Or the intellectual brains. How many intellectuals get, I don't know, weird mental problems? They just become schizo or get dementia and die. How many? I remember, once again, I mentioned last week, I used to work as an assistant nurse, and it's like the amount of people in the dementia ward who were like previously doctors themselves, it was just like all of them. Anyway, so for instance, a 1/3 death on account of the bobbin candleknots of the moving center or spinal brain often occurs there among those terrestrial beings who give themselves up to that occupation which the beings belonging to the contemporary community England now practice, thanks to the maleficent invention of the ancient Greeks, in which maleficent occupation they now call sport. Martial esotericist says the kafir dies through the death of his moving center. Sadly, I am on this path because I love martial arts and MMA. No, it's fine. Like martial arts and MMA is good, but you're also working spiritually. You can also balance the centers. That's the whole thing. Plato says, a true man, he studies philosophy, music, and wrestling. It's like, as long as you do all 3, as long as you balance yourself and develop yourself at all 3 sides, give your moving center a rest when needed, that shouldn't happen. Grant Gets Out says, you ever taken a psychology class? They are all a bit crazy, yes. No, I haven't taken a psychology class, but I can imagine. The character of the pernicious consequences of that maleficent occupation. So this is sport. And what is this? Is this going to be football or boxing? I'm thinking it's going to be kind of football or rugby or something. It's like, with the English, even in Gurdjieff's day, still obsessed with footy as they are nowadays. The character of the pernicious consequences of that maleficent occupation there you will well understand when I tell you that during my stay among those favorites of yours, I once prepared a special section for my statistics for elucidating to myself how long these 3-brained beings there can exist, who become what are called wrestlers by profession, and never once in those statistics of mine did I notice that any of them had existed longer than 49 of their years. So it's wrestling. Interesting. True King says, interesting facts, all animals have approximately the same number of heartbeats in a lifetime. Yeah, I've heard that as well. Similar idea to what Gurdjieff is expressing. It's like you have this amount of heartbeats, and the heartbeat of a frog is much faster than that of an elephant, so an elephant appears to live longer, but by time dilation they may experience the world in the same kind of amount, in the same kind of way. It's very interesting, the heartbeats and the principle of bobbin candlemas. So let's keep going. And a 1/3 death through the premature using up of the bobbin candle knots of the feeling center occurs for the most part among those terrestrial beings who become by profession what are called representatives of art. Ooh. Most of these terrestrial professionals, especially the contemporary ones, first fall ill with one or another form of what is called psychopathy. So psychopaths are just dead in the emotional center. And thanks to this, they later in their psychopathy intentionally learn, as they say, to feel. And thereafter, repeatedly feeling these abnormal being impulses, they gradually use up the contents of the bobbin candle knots of their feeling center, and thus disharmonizing the tempo of their own common presences, bring themselves to that peculiar end which is not often met with even among them there. Here, by the way, it is very interesting also to notice that 1/3 death through the feeling center occurs among your favorites also thanks to one very peculiar form of psychopathy, called their altruism. And concerning premature, partial death through the bobbin candle knots of the thinking center, the deaths of this kind among your favorites occur in recent times more and more frequently. This kind of death, although the thinking center occurs there chiefly among those favorites of yours who try to become or have already become scientists of new formation, and also among those who during the period of their existence fall ill with the craze for reading what are called books and newspapers, the result among those three-brained beings there of reading superfluously and associating only by thoughts is that the contents of bobbin candle knots of their thinking center are exhausted before the contents of the bobbin candle knots of their other being centers. And so if you're just a reader, if you just read too much Harry Potter, you die in your brain first and then make really weird statements on Twitter. Grant says, have you ever seen Mark Zuckerberg after doing jiu-jitsu? His soul has entered his body after doing some physical exercise and he now looks more human instead of like an android. Get some exercise, my boy. Yeah, hell yeah, exactly. So if you're an intellectual man, do exercise. If you're a motor instinctual person, read a book. Or learn to play a musical instrument or something. And so, my boy, all these misfortunes, namely the shortening and the duration of their existence, and also many other consequences maleficent for themselves, occur to your favorites exclusively only because they have, even until now, not yet learned of the existence of the cosmic law called equalization of many-sourced vibrations. Even if only such an idea occurred to them, and they were merely to perform their usual wiseacrings with it, perhaps they would get to understand one very simple, as they call it, secret. I admit that somebody would be certain to understand this secret because, in the first place, it is simple and obvious, and secondly, because they discovered it long ago, and they even often employed it in what they called practical use. They even use this simple secret to which I referred for those mechanical watches, which we took for comparison as an elucidating example concerning the duration of their existence. In all the mechanical watches of various systems, they use this said simple secret for regulating what is called the tension of the said spring, or the corresponding part of the general mechanism of the watch, and it is called, it seems, the regulator. By means of this regulator, it is possible to make the mechanism of a watch, wound for instance for 24 hours, go a whole month. On the contrary, thanks to this regulator, it is possible to make the same winding for 24 hours finish in 5 minutes. In the common presence of every being existing merely on the basis of itoklanos, something similar to the regulator in a mechanical watch is present and is called iransamkeep. Very interesting. Very interesting. This something means not to give oneself up to those of one's associations resulting from the functioning of only one or another's of one's brains. So people who people who can be classed as man number 1, 2, or 3 live primarily through that one brain. You can tell who they are. They solve their problems through that one brain. An intellectual person will always try to rationalize their problems or intellectualize their path out. A motor instinctual person will always try to use their body and punch their way out. And an emotional brained person will always try to manipulate or cry or evoke sympathy to get their way out. But this is interesting. It's saying there's something that what is this? Regulates something. This is in the name is the clue, not to give oneself over to one's associations resulting from only one of the brains. So it's almost like in us are three people. Like our brain itself gains these impressions and associations and builds around it, and we can move into another brain, but they're not, it's almost like they're not interconnected. We have these three selves. We have a motor instinctual person, an emotional person, and an intellectual person. We only grow one, but we need to kind of grow all three and have them interconnected and make them one. Let's see where Gurdjieff goes with this. But even if they should understand such a simple secret, it will be all just the same. They still would not make the necessary being effort quite accessible even to the contemporary beings, and thanks to which, by foresight of nature, beings in general acquire the possibility of what is called harmonious association, by virtue of which alone energy is created for active being existence in the presence of every three-brained being, and consequently in them themselves. But at the present time, this energy can be elaborated in the presences of your favorites only during their quite unconscious state. That is to say, during what they call sleep. So this is, I think Ouspensky has a big thing about like the centers, and then they have like they're connected to like a fuel kind of organ, which then there are regulators in between those things. But then he basically says how the fuel kind of fills up is during sleep. And so he says for the contemporary beings, they do it in the unconscious state of sleep, meaning that there's a conscious way to do it. So I think, talking about Dantian's Taoist meditations, or that Taoist alchemy is par excellence, or built around using the body as a kind of cauldron to reactivate certain things and basically reinitiate a process of storing energy correctly in the body. So that could actually be an interesting place to research, to go into. Now, but in your favorites, especially in your contemporary favorites who exist constantly, passively, under the direction of only one of the separate spiritualized parts of their common presence, and thereby constantly manifest themselves entirely by their factors for negative properties, also lawfully arisen in them, and hence by negative manifestations, there proceeds in them the same disproportionate expenditure of the contents of their various bob and candle knots. That is to say, the possibilities placed in them by nature according to law of action by only one or only two of their brains are always experienced, in consequence of which the contents of one or two of their bob and candle knots are prematurely exhausted, whereupon, just like those mechanical watches in which the winding is run down, or the force of their regulators is weakened, they cease to act. So, what is he saying there? There proceeds in them the same disproportionate expenditure of the contents. The possibilities placed in them by nature according to law of action by only one or two of their brains are always experienced in consequence. Like the mechanical watches. I think he's saying something like, so you can live in one or two of your brains, and if you wear down those bob and candle knots, it'll... Because there's some principle, I know Ouspensky talking about this, like the vampiring of one center from another center. Maybe he's just gonna, I'll just keep reading. He might go into that some more, give some more detail. Sometime later, I shall explain to you in detail, not only why, when beings existing only according to the principle itoklanos exist by the direction of only one or two of their spiritualized sources, and not harmoniously, that is to say with all three combined, and in agreement that the particular brain of theirs, in which there were superfluous associations, is prematurely used up in them and consequently dies during the period of its existence, but also why, owing to this, the other bobbin candle nosts also are used up, even without their own action. So even if you're a man number 3, you're an intellectual person, you can burn through your intellectual brain bobbin candle nosts just sitting in a chair reading, but somehow your motor bobbin candle nost will also dissolve as well in your overuse, and abuse of one of your centers will destroy the potential of the other centers as well, which is that call to be balanced. Reminds me, man, we're already over 2 hours, so I don't want to go off on like a tangent about Nietzsche's Zarathustra. If anyone's read Nietzsche's Zarathustra, you know that bit with like the midget with like the big ear. And he just goes off, Nietzsche goes off on a tangent talking about how there are people who are all stomach or all lips or all arm or something. And it's like these people, because they're extraordinary in only one way, everyone mistakes these people for a type of Superman, but they're actually closer to being disabled, like a disabled person who's lost their sight. And they have extraordinary hearing so much that someone could be like, wow, you have super hearing, you're like a superhero. It's like, no, you're a disabled person. It's like there's this arising of people who are so one-sided that others think that this is something brilliant, but it's actually a sickness. Anyway, Marshallus Terraces says that book is an extremely difficult book to read, just like this one. Yeah. But here, you must also know that even on your planet, one still occasionally finds one of your favorites whose duration of planetary existence exceeds 5 of their centuries. Was he talking about secret masters now? You will then understand very well that in the case of certain of your favorites, even of recent times, who by some means or other find out and correctly transubstantiate in their reason concerning details of the law of association proceeding in the separate brains of beings, and also concerning the reciprocal action of these independent associations, and who exist more or less according to what I have said, the bobbin candle nosts formed in their separate being brains are not used up, as they are among the other beings there, but their common presence acquires the possibility of existing much longer than the other 3-brained beings there. So if you're Mark Zuckerberg, you better do jujitsu. During my stay there for the last time, I myself personally met several of these terrestrial contemporary 3-brained beings who were already 2, 3, and even 4 of their centuries old. I met them mostly among a small brotherhood of the 3-brained beings there, composed of beings from almost all of their what are called religions. Ooh. A small brotherhood composed of beings of different religions, and whose permanent place of existence was in the middle of the continent of Asia. He's talking about the Theosophic White Brotherhood, people. The beings of that brotherhood, it seems, partly elucidated for themselves the mentioned laws of association in being brains, and in part such information reached them from ancient times through genuine initiates there. I think this is directly Gurdjieff speaking through Beelzebub, how he met basically a brotherhood of people who had extended their lives. He met the fantastical masters of Blavatsky and were just like, yeah, they were a bunch of dudes. As for the same contemporary community, whose beings have become the chief victims of that particularly maleficent invention of the beings of the said ancient civilization, they not only now use it in the process of their own existence, but they try to infect strongly the beings of all the other communities with the same evil. Trevor King says the Summerong Brotherhood. Yes, indeed. Moreover, owing to that maleficent sport of theirs, i.e. wrestling, these unfortunates not only still further diminish the duration of their own existence, already trifling without this, but thanks to that action of theirs, they will, in my opinion, eventually entail for their community what recently occurred to a large community there named Russia. Ooh. I thought about it during my stay there before my final departure from that planet. And I first began thinking about it when I learned that the power-possessing beings, also of that no less great contemporary community, were already utilizing that maleficent means of their sport for their own Hasnamusian aims. Exactly as the power-possessing beings of the community Russia had, for their similar aims, utilized what is called the question of Russian vodka. Okay. Just as the power-possessing beings of the community Russia then tried by every kind of artifice to instill into the weak wills of the ordinary beings the necessity of the intensive use of the said Russian vodka, so also the power-possessing beings of the community of England are now already also maneuvering to intrigue the ordinary beings of their community with the same sport to urge them to it by every means. The apprehension which then arose in me are already, it seems, being justified, and I conclude this from the etherogram I recently received from the planet Mars, in which, among other things, it is said that although there are more than 2.5 millions of what are called unemployed beings in that community England, yet the power-possessing beings there take no measures concerning this, but endeavor to spread still more widely among them the same famous sport of theirs, just as in the large community Russia, the contents of what are called newspapers and magazines used to be always devoted to the question of Russian vodka, so now in that community England, more than half of the text of all their evil sowers is devoted to that famous sport. Well, that was quite a chapter. That's been one of the longest ones for a little while now. So thank you for all joining. Thank you for coming along. I'm definitely calling that one there. Thank you for the supers. Thank you for partaking in the chat. I hope you all enjoyed. Those who watched it live and those in the future. Let's time for me to just have some rest, and I'll see y'all next week for some more bread and circuses. Nice. Tyler says you might have to split up the next one. No, never. I'm gonna power through it all. See y'all later. See y'all later. Mwah.